Hollywood loves a success story, but it rarely tells the whole truth. Behind the awards, applause, and viral moments are lives shaped by silence, pressure, and the cost of being different. Tonight we uncover the stories they weren't supposed to tell, the risks they took, the moments that changed everything. These are Black child stars you thought you knew but didn't. Stay with us because what comes next challenges everything we assume about fame, identity, and survival in the spotlight. Jussie Smith. Jussie Smith never chased the spotlight, it followed him quietly. From a young age, he moved through Hollywood with restraint, choosing roles that leaned into vulnerability rather than spectacle. While many actors are molded by fame, Smith seemed determined not to let it define him. He understood early that in an industry hungry for labels, silence could be a form of control. For years, Smith kept his personal life out of the public narrative. He believed truth should arrive on its own timeline, not under pressure from headlines or expectation. That choice set him apart in a culture obsessed with instant disclosure. Then in 2020, everything shifted softly. A short video, hands intertwined. No announcement, no interview, no justification. In that simple moment, Smith chose presence over performance. The internet reacted instantly, but he did not rush to explain. He didn't frame it as courage. He framed it as clarity. Smith stepped into deeper, more complex roles, characters shaped by emotion, contradiction, and inner conflict. Off-screen, he spoke about mental health, self-definition, and the importance of refusing narratives imposed by others. Jussie Smith's story isn't loud. It proves something quieter. Authenticity doesn't need drama to be powerful. Sometimes the boldest act is choosing when to speak and when to simply live. Brandon Flynn. Brandon Flynn entered Hollywood at full speed. Cast in 13 Reasons, why he became part of a global phenomenon almost overnight, one that turned young actors into symbols before they had time to become themselves. Fame arrived fast, loud, and unforgiving, blurring the line between who he was and what audiences wanted him to represent. Flynn chose honesty early. He publicly identified as gay without ceremony or strategy, treating it not as a revelation, but as a fact of life. That openness, however, did not shield him from scrutiny. Paparazzi culture and online speculation quickly narrowed the frame, reducing a multifaceted actor to headlines that spoke louder than his work. Flynn made a deliberate pivot. He stepped back from mainstream television and toward theater and independent film spaces where craft mattered more than visibility. It was a quiet rebellion against an industry that often rewards exposure over depth. Off-screen, Flynn has spoken candidly about mental health. He rejects the idea that success must be constant or linear, emphasizing patience, boundaries, and self-trust. In a culture that confuses noise with relevance, he proves that living openly doesn't require living loudly. Sometimes growth happens away from the spotlight, where truth has room to breathe and artistry can mature without permission. Miles Brown. Miles Brown grew up under studio lights, but identity doesn't mature on a production schedule. Introduced to audiences as the bright, confident Jack Johnson on Blackish, he became recognizable before he was ready to be fully understood. Fame gave him opportunity, structure, and admiration, yet it also fixed him in the public memory as a child long. As adolescence arrived, Brown's creative gravity shifted. Music became his refuge. Writing lyrics, producing sounds, and performing allowed him to process pressure privately away from sitcom expectations. Brown quietly evolved, protecting his personal life in an industry that often mistakes access for entitlement. That boundary was disrupted in 2023 when an image circulating online sparked speculation he never invited. Instead of letting rumor define the moment, Brown chose clarity. His response was calm, direct, and unapologetic. He framed honesty not as confession, but as self-respect. Younger fans responded with affirmation, while some longtime viewers struggled to reconcile growth with memory. Brown did not debate, he redirected. Leaning into music, he stepped away from outdated expectations and began using his platform to support LGBTQ+ youth and mental health awareness. Growing up publicly may delay self-definition, but it does not prevent it. Identity is not betrayal, it is evolution claimed. Was Miles Brown allowed to grow up, or did the audience refuse to grow up with him? Comment Miles Brown if you think his change was the right thing to do. Keiynan Lonsdale. Keiynan Lonsdale learned early that visibility comes with rules. Rising to fame through superhero franchises like The Flash and Legends of Tomorrow, he was celebrated for charisma, charm, and confidence. Yet behind the polished image, Lonsdale felt constrained by expectations about masculinity, desirability, and how a leading man was supposed to exist. Fame offered reach, but it also demanded performance beyond the screen. For years, he navigated that tension quietly, aware that deviation could be costly. In 2017, he came out publicly speaking not in absolutes, but in growth. He framed identity as fluid, evolving, and deeply personal, apparently rigid labels. The response was mixed, supportive, curious, and uncertain, but he did not retreat. Instead, Lonsdale expanded. Music became a parallel language, one that allows vulnerabilities without filters. His songs explore love, confusion, healing, and emotional openness rarely afforded to men in his position. At the same time, he began speaking candidly about mental health, emerging how pressure can distort self-perception when identity becomes brand. Eventually, Lonsdale stepped back from franchise-driven fame, prioritizing balance over exposure. He relocated, slowed his pace, and invested in wellness and independent creativity. The decision wasn't escape, it was aligned. His courage lies not in spectacle, but in consistency, choosing depth over approval and truth over expectation. Noah Ricketts. Noah Ricketts built his career in spaces where truth must be felt in real time. Trained in theater, he learned early that there are no edits on stage, only presence, discipline, and emotional honesty. That foundation shaped an artist more interested in craft than spectacle, and more committed to process than performance for attention. For years, Ricketts kept his personal life outside the public frame. He understood that visibility once offered cannot be reclaimed, and he refused to let his identity become a headline before his work could speak. A song dedicated to his partner, quiet, intimate, and unmistakably personal. There was no announcement, no explanation. Music carried what interviews often flatten. The moment resonated precisely because it wasn't staged. It felt lived in, earned, and human. He continued choosing roles that demanded emotional precision and collaboration, emphasizing listening over visibility. In conversations, he has spoken about timing and agency, reminding young artists that authenticity grows strongest when it is self-directed. Beyond acting, Ricketts invests in mentorship and education, encouraging emerging performers to protect their interior lives while building durable careers. His philosophy is simple, but rare ambition does not require self-erasure. By letting art lead disclosure, he proves that honesty doesn't need volume to be powerful, only intention. Dijon Talton. Dijon Talton's career began with momentum and promise, shaped by early success and the pressure to appear polished, predictable, and contained. As a young black actor entering television, he quickly learned that visibility came with conditions. Certain questions were welcomed, others were not. To survive, Talton drew clear lines between his work and his private life, believing distance was protection. That balance was disrupted when a personal conversation surfaced without consent, collapsing privacy overnight. Speculation replaced context and control slipped away. Rather than perform denial or feed the noise, Talton chose withdrawal. He stepped back from the spotlight not in defeat, but in preservation. Silence became a reset, not a surrender. Away from constant scrutiny, Talton reassessed purpose. He turned toward writing independent projects and community-centered storytelling spaces where intention mattered more than exposure. The shift reshaped his understanding of success, prioritizing longevity over momentum and alignment over approval. In later reflections, Talton has spoken about boundaries, accountability, and the importance of chosen family. His journey underscores a quiet truth of this era: visibility can be earned, but privacy must be defended. By choosing intention over noise, Dijon Talton proves that authenticity doesn't require constant explanation, only the courage to live aligned. Shaun Ross. Shaun Ross entered the public eye already marked as different. Born with albinism, he grew up navigating a world that stared before it listened. Long before fame, he learned that visibility could be both power and threat. When he rose as the first black male model with albinism to walk major fashion runways, his presence disrupted rigid beauty standards, but it also intensified scrutiny over every part of his identity. Ross came out publicly as gay without spectacle, refusing to let others narrate his truth. His openness was calm, deliberate, and unapologetic, grounded in self-acceptance rather than defiance. Still existing at the intersection of race, queerness, and disability meant carrying projections few could understand. Rather than retreat, Ross expanded. He moved into acting, music, and advocacy, using his platform to challenge stigma around albinism, LGBTQ+ visibility, and mental health. He spoke about isolation, self-worth, and the cost of being seen only as a symbol. Shaun Ross's story is not about overcoming difference. It's about refusing erasure. In claiming space without apology, he proves that representation is not charity, it's presence earned through truth. Colman Domingo. Colman Domingo's journey toward authenticity was shaped by patience rather than spectacle. Raised in Philadelphia, he entered the arts through theater, where discipline, restraint, and emotional precision were survival skills. As a black actor building a career in the 1990s, Domingo understood the unspoken rules. Opportunity often depended on remaining legible, and silence could be mistaken for safety. For years, he kept his personal life private, including a long-term relationship. This was not rooted in shame, but strategy. He feared that honesty might cost him roles he had worked relentlessly to earn. During that time, Domingo built a formidable resume across theater, screenwriting, and film, earning respect for his range and depth long before mainstream recognition arrived. The turning point came quietly. In 2020, during an unscripted Instagram Live, Domingo introduced his partner without fanfare. There was no announcement, no performance. The response defied his fears. Instead of rejection, he received affirmation. Since then, Domingo's work has deepened. He has embraced complex roles and stories centered on marginalized voices, proving that truth does not limit artistry, it sharpens it. His story affirms that authenticity chosen on one's own terms can become freedom rather than risk. Asante Blackk. Asante Blackk entered the industry carrying emotional weight far heavier than celebrity. His breakout role in When They See Us revealed an actor capable of profound vulnerability, someone who could hold silence as power. The performance brought acclaim, but it also placed him under a spotlight that examined more than his work. With visibility came curiosity, and with curiosity came speculation. In the early stages of his career, Blackk resisted spectacle. He focused on education, discipline, and craft, choosing grounding over hype. He avoided building a public persona, understanding how quickly narratives harden once they are formed. That restraint was tested when online rumors about his sexuality began circulating without consent, fueled by social media rather than fact. Blackk responded directly and briefly. He affirmed pride in who he is without explanation or apology, reclaiming agency without turning identity into performance. The response from fans was largely supportive, though it exposed quiet fractures, reminding how acceptance can still be uneven even among younger generations. He has pursued studies and developed projects centered on accountability, identity, and social responsibility. His choices reflect an understanding that longevity is built through intention, not reaction. Asante Black's story is about claiming truth without surrendering control and being seen on one's own terms. Jeremy Pope. Jeremy Pope's rise was built on discipline, talent, and emotional precision, but acceptance did not rise with it. Trained in theater and celebrated on Broadway before crossing into film and television, Pope earned praise for performances that felt raw and exacting. Yet behind the applause, his personal life remained carefully separated, shaped by a religious upbringing that taught him honesty could come at a cost. Support from his church community faded. Relationships, once rooted in faith and familiarity, cooled into distance. There was no public scandal, only absence and the kind of silence that lingers. Rather than retreat, Pope redirected his focus, relocating and choosing work that allowed fuller expression without compromise. his roles began reflecting deeper themes: isolation, belief, self-definition, and the tension between devotion and truth. Offstage, Pope turned to writing and poetry, using language as a private space to process loss and rebuild meaning. He speaks selectively about his journey, rejecting simple narratives of victory or defeat. Authenticity can cost community, but it can also clear space for new forms of connection. Through craft, reflection, and resolve, he continues building a career grounded not in approval, but in integrity, proving that survival, when guided by truth, becomes its own form of artistry. Jussie Smollett. Jussie Smollett grew up in the spotlight, learning early how visibility can amplify both promise and pressure. As a child actor, he moved through television and film before reaching global prominence as Jamaal Lion on Empire, one of the first openly gay black characters to lead a major network drama. For many viewers, Jamaal represented long overdue visibility, strength, vulnerability, and talent existing without apology. Smollett was open about his identity before the role brought him mainstream fame. He treated it as a fact of life, not a headline, refusing to center his career around explanation or defense. He became a symbol of progress for LGBTQ+ representation in black entertainment, using music and performance to reinforce that cultural shift. In 2019, his public narrative changed abruptly after he reported being the victim of a hate crime. The case quickly became a national media spectacle, followed by investigations and legal proceedings that concluded with findings that severely damaged his credibility. The fallout was swift, reshaping public perception and halting a career that once seemed ascendant. Since then, Smollett has largely withdrawn from Hollywood's center, focusing on independent creative work and personal reflection. A reminder that representation can elevate voices, but controversy can redefine them just as quickly, leaving legacies suspended between impact and consequence. Jojo Siwa. Jojo Siwa grew up in a world where visibility was not optional, it was the brand. From reality television to music videos and global tours, her image was built on color, energy, and relentless optimism. As a child star, she became a symbol of joy, marketed to millions, leaving little room for contradiction or complexity. Fame arrived early, and with it the pressure to remain unchanged. As she matured, the distance between persona and person widened. In 2021, Siwa chose to speak openly about her identity, not through a formal announcement but through small, casual moments online. The response was immediate and global. For many young fans, her honesty offered relief and recognition. For others, it disrupted a carefully packaged image they weren't ready to release. Rather than retreat, Siwa leaned forward. She allowed herself to evolve, publicly experimenting with fashion, sound, and self-expression even as criticism followed. She has spoken candidly about the challenge of growing up under constant observation, where every change feels like a betrayal to someone. Jojo Siwa's story isn't about shock, it's about transition. About what happens when a child star claims adulthood on their own terms. Her journey reflects a new generation learning that authenticity isn't about maintaining an image, it's about surviving beyond it. Jabari Banks. Jabari Banks stepped into the spotlight carrying a legacy he never asked for. Cast as the lead in Bel Air, a dramatic reimagining of a cultural classic, he wasn't simply introduced as a new actor, he was measured against nostalgia. From the beginning, expectations were rigid, leaving little room for reinterpretation or risk. Banks' portrayal of Will challenged familiarity. This version was introspective, emotionally guarded, and vulnerable in ways the original sitcom never explored. When the series introduced a storyline that reimagined Will as queer, the reaction was immediate and divided. Praise and backlash arrived simultaneously, often blurring the line between character and actor. Banks became the focal point of a debate larger than himself. Banks defended the creative choice, thoughtfully framing representation not as erasure of the past, but as expansion of possibility. He acknowledged discomfort without amplifying outrage, choosing clarity over confrontation. Banks worked closely with creators to protect authenticity, aware that careless storytelling could cause harm. Off-screen, he has spoken about grounding discipline and the need for balance amid pressure. Jabari Banks represents a new generation asked not only to perform but to symbolize progress. His response has been steady. Truth in storytelling matters even when it disrupts comfort. Dyllon Burnside. Dyllon Burnside's visibility was never accidental. It was shaped by discipline, vulnerability, and a long negotiation between faith, fear, and self-respect. Raised in a conservative religious environment, Burnside learned early that honesty could fracture belonging. As he pursued acting and music, he carried that lesson quietly, building a career while keeping parts of himself guarded. His breakthrough role on Pose placed him inside a cultural moment that demanded truth. The series wasn't just representation, it was confrontation. Burnside's coming out did not arrive through headlines or strategy. It unfolded through personal circumstances that reached family before he was ready, forcing a reckoning between silence and survival. The initial response was complicated distance, confusion, and quiet strain, but not final. He continued working, allowing time and consistency to do what arguments could not. On screen, his performances carried lived experience, tender, restrained, and deeply human. Off-screen music became another language, one that explored intimacy, healing, and growth without erasing struggle. Burnside has since become an advocate for mental health and LGBTQ+ youth, speaking openly about therapy, boundaries, and reconciliation. His journey reminds us that authenticity is not a single declaration. It is a practice repeated, imperfect, and sustained by courage. Brian Michael Smith. Brian Michael Smith's career was built with intention long before public recognition arrived. Trained in theater and grounded in discipline, he entered the industry with a clear understanding that longevity requires preparation, not urgency. As a Black actor navigating television and film, Smith was strategic about visibility, knowing that timing could determine opportunity. He publicly came out as a transgender man only after establishing professional stability. When he spoke, it was precise and controlled. His identity was not presented as a reveal or a twist, but as a lived truth that had always existed. By choosing language carefully, Smith redirected the conversation away from speculation and toward respect. On screen, his work rejected caricature. His role on 911 Lone Star normalized competence, authority, and emotional depth for a trans character on mainstream television. The impact was quiet but significant. Representation did not arrive through shock, but through consistency. Beyond acting, Smith advocates for structural change. He speaks about employment equity, healthcare access, and the importance of hiring trans talent behind the camera. His approach favors education over confrontation. When truth is paired with preparation, it doesn't just open doors, it changes the building. Billy Porter. Billy Porter's story does not begin with applause, it begins with rejection. Raised in a deeply religious household in Pittsburgh, he understood early that who he was did not align with what was expected of him. When his family discovered he was gay, acceptance did not follow. At just 17, Porter was forced out of his home carrying little more than talent, fear, and an unshakable will to survive. Instead of retreating, Porter sharpened his craft. He trained relentlessly in classical theater, earning respect long before mainstream recognition arrived. Success came slowly, largely on Broadway, where discipline mattered more than image. Winning a Tony Award for Kinky Boots validated decades of persistence, but it did not erase the cost of living cautiously in an industry that still punished difference. Porter balanced achievement with restraint, aware that openness could close doors. That changed when he chose radical visibility. His work on Pose reshaped how Black queer lives were seen on television, earning historic recognition and cultural impact. Beyond performance, his fashion became declaration, challenging masculinity, power, and belonging with every appearance. Porter also spoke openly about living with HIV, confronting stigma with truth and advocacy. His legacy is not survival alone, but transformation, turning rejection into protection for those still searching for home. Alex R. Hibbert. As the young lead in Moonlight, he delivered a performance defined by restraint, silence, stillness, and emotional precision far beyond his years. The film became historic, but Hibbert resisted the gravitational pull of instant celebrity. While audiences expected a rapid transformation into a conventional star, He chose distance, protecting a private interior life few child actors are allowed to keep. As he moved into early adulthood, Hibbert remained deliberate. He prioritized education and creative development over visibility, understanding that momentum can overwhelm identity when it arrives too early. His personal life stayed largely out of public view, not as secrecy, but as boundary. In 2023, that boundary was tested when an unsolicited image circulated online, sparking speculation. Hibbert responded calmly, affirming his happiness without dramatizing identity or inviting debate. The reaction was largely supportive, especially from younger audiences who recognized the power of his restraint. He redirected attention toward craft, studying, directing, and pursuing collaborative projects that value process over profile. Friends describe an artist focused on learning how stories are built, not just how they are seen. In an industry addicted to immediacy, he proves that patience is power, and that success defined on one's own terms can protect what fame often erodes. Ryan Jamaal Swain. Ryan Jamaal Swain's artistry has always lived in the body. Long before audiences noticed him, he trained as a dancer, learning how emotion travels through movement, breath, and stillness. That physical intelligence shaped his breakout performance on Pose, where resilience was communicated as much through posture as through dialogue. On screen, his character lived openly. Off screen, Swain moved with more caution. For years, he protected parts of his personal life, weighing honesty against stability in an industry that rarely rewards vulnerability evenly. A private moment overheard during rehearsal could have become rumor. Instead, it became affirmation. Support from colleagues reframed fear into possibility, reminding him that safety can exist when trust does. In interviews, his words were measured, grounded, and free of spectacle. He framed his truth not as a declaration, but as alignment. Since then, his creative focus has widened. Beyond acting, he has invested in choreography, education, and youth-centered initiatives emphasizing access to the arts for Black communities. Swain also speaks candidly about mental health and chosen family anchoring advocacy in lived experience rather than abstraction. His journey reminds us that coming out is not an endpoint. It is a recalibration, one that can strengthen artistry when honesty and care move together. Jaden Smith. Jaden Smith grew up in a world where privacy was never guaranteed. As the child of global celebrities, his life unfolded under constant observation, leaving little room to experiment quietly or fail invisibly. From the beginning, Smith resisted expectations, using acting, music, fashion, and philosophy as tools to question norms rather than fit into them. Smith has never rushed to define himself through fixed labels. His approach to identity has remained fluid, often misunderstood, and frequently debated. In 2019, during a live performance, he publicly expressed love for another male artist. The moment was brief but seismic, igniting widespread conversation. Rather than clarify or correct speculation, Smith allowed ambiguity to exist, refusing to compress a living identity into a soundbite. Family reactions also drew attention. While support was publicly expressed, the moment highlighted how even progressive spaces must adapt when convention is challenged in real time. Smith did not frame his truth as an announcement. He treated it as lived reality, evolving imperfect and unapologetic. His music explores isolation, freedom, and self-definition, while his fashion rejects traditional masculinity without courting shock. Smith's journey isn't about coming out. It's about opting out of confinement, entirely choosing openness over certainty and practice over declaration. Jussie Smith. Jussie Smith never chased the spotlight, it followed him quietly. From a young age, he moved through Hollywood with restraint, choosing roles that leaned into vulnerability rather than spectacle. While many actors are molded by fame, Smith seemed determined not to let it define him. He understood early that in an industry hungry for labels, silence could be a form of control. For years, Smith kept his personal life out of the public narrative. He believed truth should arrive on its own timeline, not under pressure from headlines or expectation. That choice set him apart in a culture obsessed with instant disclosure. Then in 2020, everything shifted softly. A short video, hands intertwined. No announcement, no interview, no justification. In that simple moment, Smith chose presence over performance. The internet reacted instantly, but he did not rush to explain. He didn't frame it as courage. He framed it as clarity. Smith stepped into deeper, more complex roles, characters shaped by emotion, contradiction, and inner conflict. Off-screen, he spoke about mental health, self-definition, and the importance of refusing narratives imposed by others. Justice Smith's story isn't loud. It proves something quieter: authenticity doesn't need drama to be powerful. Sometimes the boldest act is choosing when to speak and when to simply live.